Hey guys, and welcome to our quick discussion on the roots of federal system. The United States government is a federal system, and the United States is the world's first federal system. These are the topics we're going to talk about today. What is federalism? What are other examples of government systems besides federalism? What are national powers under the Constitution, and what are state powers under the Constitution? So we'll get started with a look at Federalist number 51. The power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then subdivided among distinct and separate departments. So there's a double protection against tyranny, where there's a separation between a state and national level, the first division that quote mentions, and then a further division between departments and branches. So originally the United States was 13 independent sovereign states, all bound together under one national government. Now in the United States there are over 87,000 different state and local governments. So federalism is the system of rules that guides the relationship between these smaller governments and the national government. And this system is continually reshaped through crisis, through historical evolution, through public expectations, and the big one here, through judicial interpretation. Some areas are left for the state, some are the domain of the national government, and some are for both. And we'll get into what those powers are in this discussion. So here's the quick definition of federalism. It's government authority shared by national and subnational governments. The subnational would be things like state and local governments. And in both of those, power is derived from the people. And this system is supposed to be a double protection against tyranny, because first you have a division of power between national government and state government, and then that power is further diluted by a system of checks and balances at both the national and state level. There are about 20 other federal systems around the world. Some big examples: Canada, Mexico, Russia, Germany, and Brazil. So the framers realized that under the Articles of Confederation, the national government derived its power from the states, which led to a weak national government. And so the framers hoped to fix that by creating a federal system. There are a few other systems of government out there, like the unitary system, which the framers had hoped to avoid, where local and regional governments derive all their power from the strong national government. It's found in Britain. Framers had made both the national and states governments accountable to the people because they feared a strong tyrannical ruler. There's also a confederal system, which is a confederacy. This is what the United States had under the Articles of Confederation, where independent states form a nation but retain their power under a weak central government. So here's a graphic that summarizes the unitary, the federal, and the confederation system of government. You can see the federal system, the people give the states and the national government their power. Both the states and national governments derive their power from the people, but also the national government is supreme. In the unitary system, the local and regional governments get their power from the central government. So the central government is the one that dispenses all the power in the unitary system. And then in the confederation, the central government gets its power from the states. So let's look at some of the major national powers that exist in the Constitution. The first one is the enumerated powers. There are 17 powers specifically granted to Congress in Article 1, Section 8. So things like the ability to tax, to coin money, the regulation of commerce, to provide for national defense, to declare war, and to establish the federal court system, which Congress did in the Judiciary Act of 1789. Then the last part of Article 1, Section 8, the last paragraph, says Congress has the authority to pass all laws, and here it is, necessary and proper to carry out the enumerated powers specified in the Constitution. This is also called the Elastic Clause. And this gives Congress the ability to expand far beyond what the framers had envisioned their power. But the framers maybe could never have imagined what the world would be like today, so maybe the elastic clause is a stroke of genius. But some argue that it gives Congress too much power. It gives away power gregariously. Another big aspect of national power is the supremacy clause. This comes from Article 6 of the Constitution. It says that national law is supreme, that is, it supersedes all other laws passed by the states or any other subdivision of government. The supremacy of the U.S. Constitution may be the final word, but it doesn't say that other levels of government are powerless. Rather, local authorities cannot deny certain national provisions. And after the Constitution was written, wars are going to be fought over exactly how this works. So this is subject to continuous judicial interpretation. But the earliest example of the supremacy clause being applied is the court case of McCulloch versus Maryland, where the state of Maryland had set up a tax on a national bank. And the Supreme Court, first of all, decided that the national government does have the power to create a national bank, and that the state cannot tax it because of the supremacy clause. And now that we've looked at national powers under the Constitution, let's look at some state powers. Because states held all the power at the time of the Constitutional Convention, the framers felt no need to list and restate the powers of the states as they did for the national government, for the enumerated powers of the national government. Article 1 does say that states can set the time, places, and manner for holding elections for senators and representatives. Article 1 also limited Congress from passing any law that limited the slave trade before 1808. Article 2 requires each state to appoint electors to vote for president in the Electoral College, and Article 4 contains the Privileges and Immunities Clause. Let's look at the Privileges and Immunities Clause in a little more detail. This guarantees that the citizens of each state are afforded the same rights as citizens of all other states. But it's not until the 10th Amendment where states' rights were described in more detail. And the 10th Amendment, of course, is the final part of the Bill of Rights that defines the basic principle of American federalism in stating the powers not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. These powers are called the reserve or police powers. And the definition of reserve or police powers is powers reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment that lie at the foundation of the state's right to legislate for the public health and welfare of its citizens. Today, the 10th Amendment is used as a rationale for many restrictions on abortion, for criminal law, and the application of the death penalty. So we know that federalism divides power between the national, state, and local governments, and the 10th Amendment is the guarantor of that division of power. Reserving power to the states and local governments is another way that people are protected against tyranny of absolute authority from the national government. Concurrent powers, and we'll also look at powers denied under the Constitution, but we'll start with concurrent powers. The definition is authority possessed by both the state and national governments that may be exercised concurrently, as long as that power is not exclusively within the scope of national power or in conflict with national law. And a more simplistic definition is powers shared by the national and state governments. For example, the power to tax, borrow money, establish courts, make and enforce laws necessary to carry out these powers. So here's a graphic that sums up national powers, state powers, and concurrent powers. So the national powers would be enumerated powers. State powers can also be called reserve powers or police powers. And then concurrent powers are powers that both the national and state governments can use. States can also not enter into compacts with other states without congressional approval. Congress cannot favor one state over another, and Congress cannot lay duties on items exported from any state. There are also some restrictions imposed upon the national and state governments in the Constitution. So neither the national or the state government can take arbitrary action affecting constitutional rights and liberties. Neither the state or national governments can pass bills of attainder, which is a law declaring an act illegal without a judicial trial, or an ex post facto law, which is a law passed after the fact. So it would be making a previously legal activity illegal and subject to current penalty. And both of those, the bills of attainder and ex post facto law, are prohibited under the Constitution. And finally, let's look at some relationships between the states. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction in disputes between states. So that means that if two states disagree and there's a lawsuit, then that case, because it's between two states, would go directly to the Supreme Court. That's what original jurisdiction means, that court would hear it first. Another constitutional aspect that addresses the relationship among the states comes from Article 4. It is the full faith and credit clause. This is the part of Article 4 that ensures judicial decrees and contracts made in one state will be binding and enforceable in any other state. State courts must honor the judgments of other state courts, for example. And a good example would be the Violence Against Women Act, which requires states to give full faith and credit to protective orders issued in other states. States have to extradite criminals where they have been convicted, as another example. And finally, we look at interstate compacts, which are contracts between states that carry the force of law. They're generally now used to address multi-state policy concerns. And this comes from Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which says, "No state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with another state without the approval of Congress." But they're becoming much more common today. For example, there's a driver's license compact, a nationwide recognition of licenses issued in respective states. There's the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, it's a compact that says states cooperate and share resources in the event of natural or man-made disasters. And that brings us to the end of our introduction to federalism. We'll get into the history of federalism in the next discussion. Hope this helps. Good luck studying.